Greetings and welcome to the third part of our epic look back at the giant monster movies of 1957. We have previously covered 20 Million Miles to Earth, A Crab of the Crab Monster, Attack of the Crab Monsters, The Incredible Shrinking Man, Kronos, The Deadly Mantis, The Monster from Green Hell, The Giant Claw, The Monster That Challenged the World, The Beginning of the End, The Cyclops. I'm your host, Gabe, and with me once again, for the last time in this series, is Patrick. Quickly say hello, Patrick.
How's it going?
All right. Let us move on then to a better, not very good movie that I enjoyed a lot more, which is The Land Unknown by Virgil W. Vogel. And this one is Navy Commander Alan Roberts is assigned to lead an expedition to Little America in Antarctica to investigate reports of a mysterious warm water inland lake. His helicopter and its small party, including reporter Maggie Hathaway, is forced down into a volcanic crater by a fierce storm. They find themselves trapped in a lush tropical environment that has survived from prehistoric times. So yeah, this is a Lost World. This is the Lost World.
Or the land that time forgot.
Oh, the land that
as
time
well.
Forgot. Yeah, I guess The Land Unknown. I forgot about it because it's unknown. Jesus, some of these titles, man. Vogel was making TV well into the 1990s and was a really good editor, and he did Touch of Evil, but he's sort of an honorary Universal Monster guy because he did The Mole People, which is sometimes counted. Those little figures that I have, the little blind box figures, included a mole person. So by those rules, as we were saying, the Piccolo is a Universal Monster because I got him from a blind box. Those rules. I don't know if you even remember this conversation at this point.
I forgot that was why Piccolo is a Universal Monster. I do remember saying that, but I forget the bullshit justification of such.
And it's funny because people listening to this might have just heard that anecdote, depending on how things are divided here. And they're like, how did he forget? He just said, anyway, it was weeks ago for us. I was a big dinosaur kid. That's what led me to giant monster movies. But this one, I don't think was really ever available. So I never saw this. I don't know if I even ever heard of this until we made the list for the podcast.
Yeah, it was part of a box set that collected a bunch of these Universal International 50 sci-fi movies. So it's like you would have gotten it along with the Deadly Mantis and stuff like that. But I don't think it got like a really proper solo release until fairly recently.
It must not have had much of a VHS release either. If I never.
No, it was. It was kind of neglected. I think even in its day. I think this is a movie that it's by Universal. But the thing about this movie is they had ambitions for it, and then This Island Earth, which was a much more expensive, shot in color sci-fi movie, was a flop. And that is what led Universal to be like, you know what? Sci-fi isn't it anymore. And they cut the budget to this, and I don't think they did much of a release for it either. And it's also not very well regarded because it's not very good. So it's not like it built a cult following over the years or anything like that.
It's interesting because Jack Arnold was going to direct This Island Earth, who did The Incredible Shrinking Man. And it was going to star Cary Grant, who we just talked about as the guy who you get when you can afford Cary Grant and not his fourth best lookalike like you do when you're making the Cyclops. But Vogel edited that movie, which is why I assume he was handed this movie as like a consolation prize is my assumption.
For me, this movie is sort of there's three core things. One is if we're charting the roles of the women in these stories, we have another lady journalist in Shirley Patterson's character. But this movie opens with a couple scenes in a row, I think, where every single male character flirts with her, and she flirts back with them all in front of each other. So it is like the weirdest horny energy. And like the idea is she's a journalist and they're going on this expedition to the Arctic, or to the Antarctic rather, and they're like, "Are you sure you want to be alone on a boat with 200 men?" And she's like, "Boy, sounds like heaven," or something like that. Maybe not
Yeah.
that forward. She's maybe not Mae West, but she's close to Mae West.
She's basically, instead of saying I have sex with all these men, she'll say I will dance with all these men. That kind of thing.
Sure, but like,
or wait, was that this movie where she dances with everybody, or was that shit?
No. That's the Deadly Mantis.
That's the Deadly Mantis where she did. Okay, so this one is the Deadly Mantis plus some. It's even more sexual harassment.
The Deadly Mantis has all of the men who have been stuck in the Arctic for years and years. They finally see a woman and they're like, what do we do again? Yeah, and she sort of handles it with grace and like lets them down gently.
Yeah.
But in this one, the female lead, played by Shirley Patterson, kind of just encourages it. And in fact, there's one guy in particular, which this is very King Kong, the one sailor that she's just like madly in love with.
Right.
But rather than it being a like, I think the thing that happens with Fay Wray and the other guy in King Kong is that he's sort of like, I don't like the idea of women on this cruise.
It's
and
bad luck. Yeah.
And they sort of have a tempestuous relationship that then turns into love. In this one, she is just throwing herself at him, and he has no social cues whatsoever. So he just is like totally unaware that she's flirting, and they'll fly, their plane over a bunch of penguins or whatever, and he'll make a comment about mating season, and she's like, "Oh, is it mating season?" And he's like, "Yes, it is mating season for penguins." Like, he's just not getting that she's throwing herself at him.
Do you remember what you told me when we were discussing this particular movie over G-Chat?
I don't. I just know what I have in my notes here.
Okay, what is your
all
note?
Caps. Is this going to be a fuck boat? Is everyone going to fuck? Is this the start of an erotic novel? People cannot stop flirting.
No, what you told me, you called it the perils of falling in love with someone on the spectrum.
Yes, that is... Yeah, it's 1957. They're not going to frame it in that way, but basically this poor woman is in love with someone.
He's always dropping nature facts instead of flirting. She's like, hey, here's a double entendre. And he'll go, that's interesting because penguins, blah, 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 blah.
She's in love with hunky Jonathan Lipnicki, who knows how much the human head weighs. And she is being the least subtle woman in the history of American cinema up to this point, and he's still not getting it, which is tough. And all that sexual energy plays a part later on, because then it turns into this is a plot I associate with the Roger Corman movie Day the World Ended, which I think predates this a little bit, but I'm sure that this is a common trope that he did not originate. But the idea of like, there's only one woman and three men, and we're at the end of the world, and how are we going to share this woman? This is also Last Woman on Earth, which is another later movie he made with the same plot.
Oh, there's also The Quiet Earth, which does it in a thoughtful way. But
no, that's true. Yeah, The Quiet Earth comes in the 80s, and that's a different kind of movie.
That's like a taking that story and trying, let's do something artful with it kind of idea.
Yeah, absolutely.
But this is not artful at all.
No, so I guess the idea is that it's all like thematically tied to like, the liberated woman of the 50s and her ability to choose her destiny and to, choose her sexual partner and to, be sexually aggressive and to enjoy the mating ritual or whatever. Like, the perils of that is when she gets too much of a good thing and these aggressive men are all fighting over her. And it's like, this movie gets gross, basically.
Yeah. I mean, the basic idea is they find this place. There's all these cool monsters. I'll talk about the monsters in a bit because that's the thing I like about this movie. But there's also one of the people from the thing they're looking for has survived alone in this savage land. And as soon as he sees a woman, he kidnaps her. And then later on, he tries to make a deal because they need helicopter parts. And he says, if you let me keep the woman, I'll get your helicopter parts. And it's almost interesting because she's like, hey, I'll take one for the team. You guys need to get out of here. And they're the ones going, no, we can't do this. And she's like, yeah, we're all gonna die if we don't do this. So let's just do this. And part of me is like, just tell him you're gonna do it, then shoot him in the head when he shows you where the helicopter is.
Yeah.
But they're too honest for that. They're all these men are too honest for that. And so it's actually a really frustrating plot, because don't give the rapist what he wants, but also just let him show you where the thing is. You can kill him and not feel bad about it.
If someone is like an unrepentant, desocialized, gone stark raving mad from being stuck in the wilderness, views human beings as tools and property, and is willing to play with people's lives for sexual satisfaction, then you can go ahead and pop him in the head. It's fine.
Like
that's my moral stance.
It's like he got trapped here not only with monsters, but a bunch of Ayn Rand literature, because he just goes on and on about this, like him being the apex person, and that he wants to stay here because there's nothing for him back in the real world and stuff like that. It's
so the meme that went around recently where women were saying whether or not they'd rather be stuck in the woods with a bear or a man.
Yeah.
This is that movie where it's like, yes, there are dinosaurs and giant like man-eating plants and stuff, but the actual danger is the guy.
Is this man. It's not even all the men. It's just this one awful man. The other men,
the
other men are a negative danger. She wants more danger out of them. Yeah, the guy who plays the crazy person, Henry Brandon, he does do a good job of being a fucking psycho. That you want them to shoot in the back of the head and run away from the whole time.
Yeah, he made my skin crawl in a way that I was just like, oh, I hate this. And it was just effective.
Not to give it away, but he does survive in the end. And I was so angry that I thought that he was going to die helping them, which would have been, I'm okay with a good redemption arc. But no, they actually get him out and he survives. And they're like going to be friends with this guy now. Like, just send him straight to prison as far as I'm concerned.
Oh, holy crap. Holy cow. You know who this guy is?
Who?
I think this is the guy he's an Assault on Precinct 13.
Uh-huh.
I think this is the guy who punches what's-his-name in the face and then says, oh, look, he fell.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And then gets later killed. Sergeant Chaney. I'd have to rewatch it to remember which character Sergeant Chaney is, but I think he's like, oh, you look at him and you go, oh, that piece of shit. I hope he gets his all the way into 1976.
Yeah, he's also in the War of the Worlds, but there's not a lot of memorable humans in the War of the Worlds. It's kind of the way it's set up. But he's also in The Searchers, as I believe another scumbag. It's hard to remember. There's also zero talk of atom bombs or radiation this time. This is a naturally occurring savage land, which is precisely what happens in the X-Men comics, actually. Though I suppose the savage land, it might be because of the rocks from outer space caused it, depending on which version you're watching. But this just goes back to this constant thing where, like, me as a comic nerd keeps going, God, a lot of these Marvel comics were introduced like 4 years after this, and they have a lot of little things in common. And I know these are common occurrences, but like, I don't know, were Stan Lee and Jack Kirby spending a lot of time at the drive-ins and just writing down ideas from the drive-in?
I'm sure it's one of those things that it's just like, you're watching these movies and you're also reading pulp magazines and you're also reading the books that this movie is taking influence from, and you're also reading
Doyle
other
story
comic books
too.
Sir Arthur Conan Doyle did The Lost World, and then I think it was Edgar Rice Burroughs did The Land That Time Forgot.
Yeah.
Which I've seen the 60s, late 60s, possibly early 70s adaptation of The Land That Time Forgot, and it is very close to this, other than the fact that there isn't the sort of fascist doctor character who's already there.
Right. But, let's say something good about this, and the reason to watch this is it's a smorgasbord of cheap effects techniques. None of them are done well, but they try everything. There is a static pterodactyl prop on a string. There's a slimy, wiggly, man-eating flower that I'm guessing is puppeted. There is footage of two big monitor lizards fighting. Again, it's not great to watch these poor monitor lizards fighting each other. And then there's a man in an Allosaurus suit that has an opening, closing mouth and eyes.
Very funny looking Allosaurus.
Ask me how I know it's an Allosaurus and not a T-Rex.
How do you know it's an Allosaurus and not a T-Rex, Gabe?
Has 3 fingers, not 2.
dinosaur kid.
My favorite is there's like some sort of plesiosaur sea dinosaur that keeps popping up, and it looks like it was probably the most expensive prop they made.
Because it's like kind of life size,
and it
even though it's not very articulated.
So slow, but they've set it up so that they can throw fire in its mouth without destroying the prop. So every time somebody fights it, they throw fire in its mouth.
They shoot a flare gun directly inside of its head. It's pretty good.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it's got all this stuff going on, and then it has the cyclorama, I think is what you call it, when you have the backdrops that are actually circular, so they look like they go further back into the distance. That mixed with the CinemaScope, which they shot this in. I'm guessing they already bought the CinemaScope back when it was going to be a more expensive movie. So it has decent cinematography, and then it has these really nice sets and matte painting backdrops, sort of.
I love the matte paintings in this.
Yeah.
They are of that King Kong style where they are halfway between like something that is convincing reality and something that feels like a dream.
Yeah. And they're mixing things. They have forced perspective miniatures, and they have layers of it. They'll have a painted backdrop, and then they'll have an actual matte painting in front of that. Like, it's another thing I wonder, back when it had a bigger budget, if they hired someone who really knew what they were doing, and then they lost their budget. So they're like, well,
yeah,
we have to take out every trick in the book to make this not look like shit.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where it's like, well, the sets are built, but the shooting schedule's been cut in half, so we're only getting 2 takes max any given scene. You know what I mean? This scene that was gonna be broken up into multiple shots is now just one master, and so is this scene, and so is this scene, and so
there's a bad case of the flower attack, and I never ever noticed continuity errors, but they have only one shot of her getting attacked by the flower, but they need an extra shot of the flower sneaking up on her, so her hair is up all of a sudden and then back down and then up, and her shirt still has sleeves, because the way we show that they've been stuck in this hazardous environment is they just keep losing parts of their clothes, basically. So there's just this one shot where she is clearly from way earlier in the movie when the plant was first looking at her, with however plants look at things. Shirley Peterson is the plucky investigative reporter. I would argue she's the least plucky of our plucky investigative reporters, but she's not terrible. She was a Columbia regular. We were just talking about the Batman serial. She was Batman's girlfriend, a character that otherwise I don't think was even in the comics, but might have been a minor character in the comics. She played Batman's girlfriend, or Bruce Wayne's girlfriend, for a couple of them. And she was in World Without End and Terror from Beyond Space.
You say she's less plucky. I say she is plucky about different things.
Yeah. I suppose
as soon as they crash land, you don't really get a single line from her where she's like, wow, this is going to make an incredible story. I'm really fucking feasting here as a magazine journalist. Like, no one's going to believe this. This is going to be incredible. I can't believe I have this scoop that there is a secret prehistoric jungle land inside of the Antarctic. But when it comes to, like, I have to bone this pilot, she's pretty plucky.
She's the least Lois Lane-esque of all of them.
Yes, for sure.
She also looks distractingly like Janet Leigh. Like,
that's true.
A lot like Janet Leigh.
She's got very good eyebrows. Good.
Yeah. Good makeup person. Another one, probably somebody left over from when they had a bigger budget. And this also features Jack Kennedy, who's the guy who you get when you can't afford Fred McMurray or his top 3 lookalikes.
Yeah, I guess he does kind of have a Fred McMurray look to him now that I'm taking a look at him.
It's funny because William Reynolds is the pilot on the expedition who doesn't have much to do. And it's funny because he is both more handsome than Marshall Thompson, who plays the boring guy. But he has way more chemistry with the actress, and the couple scenes they share together where they're kind of like being buddies instead of a romantic couple.
That's it for me for the Land Unknown.
I don't got much else. Yeah, so it looks nice. I could see this being like a nice color CinemaScope movie with a bigger budget and a better director, being something sort of interesting, but it would still have the sort of creepy basic underlying story, so maybe not.
Check out The Land That Time Forgot, the one from the 70s with the U-boat. It's fun.
Yeah,
it's got just good late night TV, catch it on the Late Late Show kind of vibes, and is in color.
That's not the one with Peter Cushing. No, he's in the
That's the
Center of the
Journey to
Earth.
the Center of the Earth.
That's right.
Another Edgar Rice Burroughs adaptation from that
I think
era.
those two were like coupled as a DVD set or something. That's
I believe you're right. At some point, MGM had the rights to both.
Right. All right. Well, let's move on to the first good movie we've talked about in a while here, which is The Black Scorpion.
Hell yeah.
This is directed by Edward Ludwig. The plot synopsis of this one, according to Letterboxd, is volcanic activity frees giant scorpions from the earth to wreak havoc in a rural countryside and eventually threaten Mexico City. As that implies, this is another one that takes place in Mexico. Edward Ludwig, just quickly, he made a lot of westerns and war movies, and he worked with John Wayne a lot. He also made a lot of adventure movies, and the one that I knew him from, I was a childhood fan of the 40s version of Swiss Family Robinson. I don't know if we had a tape of it or something when I was a kid. So I knew him from that otherwise, but he didn't do a lot of sci-fi. So this was sort of like, is this a bit of an outlier in his thing? But the other important element here is that we have the original King Kong animator Willis O'Brien working on the critters, who, like the title suggests, are giant scorpions. And there's actually more than just giant scorpions. There's a worm tentacle thing.
Love that worm.
There's a trapdoor spider is what they say it is. And then there's this kind of bat that they don't really describe very well. The rumor has also always been that these bugs were left over from the deleted spider pit scene from King Kong, the legendary deleted spider pit scene that Peter Jackson and his people redid in old-fashioned stop motion for basically just for a special feature on their King Kong movie. But there isn't a lot of there's not much to back that up. Anybody involved said that if those were around, those probably would have rotted by the time they were making this movie.
Right.
Ray Harryhausen himself said that he just said there's no way that and they would have been stuck in the RKO vault anyway. He wouldn't have. He says Willis O'Brien wouldn't have taken them home with him.
Right.
So, yeah.
Though I will say, in spirit, there are several scenes in this that feel like how that Lost Spider Pit sequence is described.
Yeah.
Where they are literally stuck deep underground with a giant bug sort of surrounding them.
Yeah.
And it is very scary and upsetting, especially once the scorpion and I think it's the scorpion and the worm fight, or the scorpion and the spider fight.
It's like a worm that has tentacles. It's like halfway between a worm and a centipede and a spider. It's like, yeah, they fight.
That like all of that stuff has this sort, because this movie is closer to King Kong than it is to some of the more sci-fi driven ones. Like it has more of a swashbuckling nature to it. It's more of an adventure tale. It's got a little bit more imagination as to what the giant animal is getting up to. And those scenes underground in particular have a heightened, very scary atmosphere to them that reminded me more of King Kong than of like the beast from 20,000 Fathoms.
That's also, unless I missed something, it's not a radiation or atomic leak that causes. These are animals that already live underground and are
It's just a earthquake opens up a volcano and now they are free.
When we were watching it, Christine.
So it's really the Deadly Mantis story.
Yeah. It's much closer to that. While we were watching this, Christine got curious and she did research and she discovered that the story itself, and I agreed with her when I read this, was probably based on the real life Paricotin volcano, which was an active volcano from the early 40s through 1952, and there's a lot of cases of it going off at inopportune times and messing things up. And there's some stock footage at the beginning of the movie that I wasn't able to place, but I was wondering if it was actual footage from one of these explosions that they were having.
I would believe it. I thought the volcano stock footage was quite good. I really enjoyed it.
And it's also the event. So on the Wikipedia page, it doesn't mention this movie, but it says it was the event that inspired the classic LA volcano movie, Volcano. Because it was near enough to Mexico City, I guess, that it was. But yeah, Volcano is not anywhere any at all otherwise similar to this movie. But and then I got curious and I looked it up, and the standard bark scorpion, which is what I assume they have in Mexico because that's what we have in the Sonoran Desert in southern Arizona. They can run, and I looked this up multiple times because it seemed insane to me. It claims they can run 12 miles an hour if they really get moving. So normal humans are much slower than that. Like that's, I mean, like Usain Bolt can run faster than that, but that's like faster than most people can run at that little scale. So if you scaled them up to 50 feet, they could do like 80 miles an hour. That really freaked me out because there are scenes in this movie where they go over long distances pretty quickly, and I was like, is that possible? And yeah, I think it would be possible if you had 50-foot long scorpions that they could just take the desert 80 miles an hour and go, you know, from one place to another like a fucking jet plane. Well, not a jet, but like a very fast car.
I am so scared of scorpions.
Have you ever been stung by a scorpion?
I did not grow up in Arizona, Gabe.
But
so
didn't you
encountered
spend some time in Houston?
Houston, we did not have the scorpions.
Are you sure? I bet
not in my I never saw a scorpion in my neck of the woods in Houston. That's all I'll claim. But I think they are nature's worst abomination. They are so upsetting to me.
They are. There's a lot going on. There's a lot going on.
There's so much going on. It's like I'm not particularly scared of spiders, but yes, of course, something with all of the legs makes you a little uneasy. But then it's also like, oh yeah, it's like the claws that make crabs kind of
it's
creepy.
Got pinchers.
And it's got like that armor that crabs have that make them sort of frightening. And then it's got of course, the tail, and it's like, scorpions. This movie's awesome, and like,
yeah,
I think the scorpions, especially as photographed, like largely in silhouette, there's a lot of day for night shooting in this movie.
Yeah.
And so you get a lot of like very dusky deserts with these dark shapes crawling around, which I think probably helps make the special effects look even better, is because they're slightly hidden by the lighting. I think they are so scary.
They are creepy the way O'Brien does them because they have that creep factor, but they also have this like scary monster factor. Like
especially in the, not the O'Brien close-ups, but in the practical puppet mouth, that close-up of the face, it's got like weird eyeballs and like
it's drooling. It looks it looks a little like the xenomorph, honestly, when it's in the close-ups.
Yeah, it's pretty repulsive.
I think that, but you know, this one also has. It's not just that the effects are good, and there are some like the setup is really good. It's the kind of classic thing where this mysterious thing has caused destruction and all the people are missing. We don't see like dead bodies everywhere. We just like, where are all the people? Where have they gone?
Yeah.
And we're kind of stuck with these two guys from out of town who don't know what's going on. They don't even know where they are. And it's like a really creepy setup. And there's a jump scare where they find a dead cop. And I think that, you know, it's a relatively effective jump scare. It must have like knocked them out of their seats in 1957. Yeah.
I also like, if the curse of, you know, we're talking about all these movies, if the curse of watching these movies is the just sheer volume of scenes of square-jawed, boring military men sitting at a table, having discussions about how to practically deal with things, and like, God, so many of these lead characters are so boring or whatever. The fact that we basically have two cowboys as the leads of this movie, that we have, they have a little bit of that Fred Ward and Kevin Bacon energy from Tremors. Like they're kind of buddies, and they're kind of joshing each other and poking fun at each other and stuff like that. Like I was like, oh, thank God. Like I saw this movie. It came at the exact right time when doing research for this episode. And I'm just like, oh, I'm so happy I finally have one of these where like the characters are kind of fun and interesting and cool.
Yeah. The white lead is Richard Denning. And I know him from Creature from the Black Lagoon. And he's in Creature with the Atomic Brain, which I just saw, but that movie was in one ear and out the other. I don't remember anything that happened in it. And then the cowboy scientist is played by Carlos Rivas, who I recognized. He's half Mexican actor from Texas. And being half Hispanic, half white, he plays all sorts of generic other people that non-white people. So he's in like The King and I. That's what Christine remembered him from. And he's in the original True Grit. But he's also in a mediocre B-Western that I really like called The Gatling Gun. But he's really charming. I like him a lot. Both the actors are really charming guys.
Yeah.
And then
And later on, when we get to our female lead, we get a little bit of redemption from Mara Corday, because she was stuck in maybe the worst of all of these movies, The Giant Claw.
yeah.
Mara Corday, to be fair, Mara Corday playing a Mexican, I don't know.
Yeah. I mean,
But at least she gets like a better romance in this movie.
yeah. And she doesn't do, I mean, she's supposed to be a Mexican, but she doesn't do like a goofy Mexican accent or anything like that. So like there's like the, she could be like part Mexican from other else out where. Yeah, she kind of gets away with it in a way you can't get away with anymore, but at the time I feel like the fact that she didn't have brown face and she doesn't do a dumb accent. So it's about as good as you can expect. But she's also good in it, and she's charming as well. Charming is just the word. They're like people you don't want to watch these people get killed.
Yeah. And this was, this is another Warner Brothers film, and this was one of the chief strengths of them. Yeah. That movie also had very good human characters.
She, I looked into her before this. Apparently, she was a showgirl by trade, which is kind of cool. I don't know. I just thought that was neat.
I think I might have dropped all my Mara Corday facts when we talked about The Giant Claw.
Yeah,
but I do know she was friends with Clint Eastwood and popped up in bit parts in a lot of his movies, including. In one of the Dirty Harry movies, she's like a waitress during a hostage situation.
Right. Yeah, she's very good. And she's on the poster looking really sultry, which is funny because she doesn't really do that during the movie. But like the poster is this big, ugly... The poster most people have seen is the big, ugly scorpion face. And then Mara Corday going,
With the little strap off the shoulder thing.
Yeah.
It's like, this is Mexico, where the décolletage is quite intense.
Yeah.
So Willis O'Brien did the stop motion with Pete Peterson, because Willis O'Brien was quite old at this point.
Yeah.
So I think it was sort of him directing with Pete Peterson actually doing the animation.
The physical animation.
There's a lot of debate about the origin of this, whether or not it was like Willis O'Brien had this test footage and then Warner Brothers decided to make a movie based around the test footage he already shot, or if they originated the story and then hired Willis O'Brien or what. There's differing accounts on that. But something that is interesting about this movie is that it does feel a little bit as in the storytelling department, it's like a little bit sloppy, where it's just kind of all over the place in terms of effects. Like sometimes I think maybe they certainly didn't have like King Kong time and money for this. And like some of the stop motion is like out of focus. It seems like maybe they do
it again. No time to do a second take or whatever.
I think like it feels like maybe this was done like a little fast and loose. The story itself has just like a lot of weird little curlicues, like them going underground, which ultimately I don't think results in very much. And it's just sort of like an excuse to introduce these other giant monsters this late in the game, which is like, that's a Bert I. Gordon thing for sure, because all that is just a different animal that he has to photograph in front of a green screen. But generally speaking, these movies would just like, if it's called The Black Scorpion, it's about a giant scorpion.
Yeah, it should really be called The Black Scorpions, but whatever.
Yeah. And this movie has like a little bit of a looser, it feels like broken out of that very strict formula that so many of these movies has. And I think that's another reason why, especially in contrast to a lot of the other movies that we were watching for research, this one like stood out to me as just like this breath of fresh air, and it was just like such a delight. Because I couldn't necessarily guess what the next scene was going to be, which isn't true of, say, the Deadly Mantis.
This is it's the third one we've watched. Other than 20 Million Miles to Earth, and I can't even remember. There's 3 of them where there's a little boy.
Yes, I was going to say the little boy in this is Juanito is very much I think it's Pepe in 20 Million Miles to Earth is the little kid, and that kid even wants to go to Texas and have his little cowboy hat and everything.
Yeah, this kid is not trying to make money off everything that he's doing, but
right.
But he does go along when he shouldn't, which creates a problem, which is something that modern disaster and monster movies do all the time. It's like I know that that didn't originate here, but it's one of those things that's kind of stuck around, is the kid that goes along when he shouldn't, and it creates problems. He's played by Mario Navarro, who plays a kind of similar character in the Magnificent Seven, the original Magnificent Seven. So that was kind of his bread and butter, was cute Mexican kid. And I also have a note here that's saying this was rated X in England because it was considered too bleak for.
Really?
Yeah.
That train derailment. They
Yeah.
got him. They were upset. I at some point my notes get not just at some point, in a lot of points while I was watching this movie, I got just really all caps because I was just getting really into it. I said, I hate scorpions, giant scorpions. Scorpions are so scary. Honey, I Shrunk the Kid memories.
Yeah.
They're inflamed by the smell of blood, I think is a line of dialogue.
Yeah.
And
they're
then
mean.
They're mean. And my last note is snatching a helicopter from the sky.
Yeah.
Yes. which is just like, again, this is a movie that has ambition, and it's not just, well, we have the scorpions walking from left to right. We have them walking from right to left. We have a couple stock things that we're going to keep using. There's all sorts of weird stuff. There's a lineman up on a telephone pole who gets killed by a scorpion.
Which made me think of Tremors. I wonder
Again, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Tremors is based on a lot of old monster movies, so I wonder if Yeah. Well, the other note here, because remember we were talking way at the beginning of the first episode of this series, we kept on running into Oscar winners and Oscar nominations. This is another one that involves an Oscar, 3-time Oscar nom and 1-time winner in the cinematographer, Lionel Linden, and it is really nice photography. The moody Western noir, I love that thing. That whole like black and white Westerns that are dark and moody are just the coolest. And he won for Around the World in 80 Days, which was released the year before this. So they're working with an Oscar winner as their cinematographer. But I'm more impressed by the fact that he shot the Manchurian Candidate, which would have.
Oh God, yeah. I mentioned the day for night photography, especially early on after they sort of discover this house that the family is missing, but there is a baby still in a crib.
Oh yeah,
and they have to get the baby, and they take it to this church, and then when they get to the town, they see that all the townsfolk are out and panicking, and it's all day for night photography, and it's like very dim, and you can barely see what's happening, and they just know. I mean, the pitch of it is like, oh, of course, these people, their superstitions, they think that there are demons in the mountain or whatever. But like the idea of like this panic settling across this village and everyone like running to the church and this priest trying to like help everyone when he totally can't, and then suddenly getting this baby like thrust at him. Mm-hmm. There's a certain ground level sense of panic that you rarely see. What you usually see is the military men encountering something, and then we see a newscaster saying something, and then we see people listening to the news, or we see crowds of people running from a high angle, and they run off, from screen left to screen right, and that's it. You know what I mean? But this idea of like this ground level confusion and panic sort of bubbling around before you ever see the scorpion is really cool.
Yeah, I mean, the only other thing I can think of that does that is the original Godzilla has that sort of slow reveal.
Yeah. That village in Godzilla, when they first see Godzilla peeking its head over the hill, and there's the one guy who's like, because the fishing isn't so good anymore, and there's the one guy who knows it's Godzilla, and everyone else thinks it's an old superstition or whatever.
Yeah, it's
cool. This is a cool, ambitious, dynamic movie, and I think it's a little rough around the edges in ways that it's like, is this better than them? It's sort of maybe not quite as good as them or something, because I feel like that's a more complete film. It's certainly, we're talking about like the original Godzilla. That's like the, that or King Kong, the original King Kong are like, neck and neck for hands down the greatest monster movies ever made.
But the fact that you can even really realistically discuss it in that company and it's not that good, but it's still pretty good.
And it's not a movie that is widely seen or talked about in the way that Them or Beast from 20,000 Fathoms or 20 Million Miles to Earth and all those Harryhausen movies are talked about. Like, people don't really, I think the Black Scorpion has not yet been rediscovered, and I don't know if like the new audiences for cult films have a taste for 1950s sci-fi or whatever. I don't know if this can get rediscovered the way some other movies do, but it does feel like it deserves a reputation that's greater than what it has.
Well, I actually want to close this out. That goes into something a little bit of a tangent. Is the way that most people see this movie is from Mystery Science Theater 3000. I sometimes really resent that series.
Yeah.
And I don't blame them, but there's multiple generations of people like Gen Xers and a lot of millennials kind of think that B movies are only worth mocking,
Right.
which I don't think was their intent. I don't think that was Mystery Science Theater's intent, but it's a case where this movie doesn't deserve that treatment. That happens every once in a while. Another one is the Danger Diabolic episode. Makes no sense to me because that movie's already a comedy. And so that movie is misconstrued by people who don't care, which again, you shouldn't have to care about Mario Bava movies. That's not the statement I'm trying to make here. But it's people who don't care about Mario Bava movies think that we're making fun of a movie that's already supposed to be funny. And this is a case where, there are cheesy, silly things that you could make fun of. But I don't think this movie deserves that treatment. I think it's okay to make fun of any movie. But I just wish that that wasn't the way we were introduced to this particularly well done, dated but well done movie.
Yeah, I think Mystery Science Theater 3000 had a dynamic relationship with the movies that it covered on a movie to movie basis.
Yeah.
And I think some of those episodes are more loving, and some of those episodes are more mocking. And I think that I think a lot of the fan base has flattened that nuanced approach to appreciating the sort of detritus of forgotten trash culture, which is sort of the Gen X tendency that produces something like Mystery Science Theater 3000.
Right.
I think a lot of that has gotten flattened into feed me up something, I get to call it cringe and mock it for being cringe. But on the other hand, I know a lot of people who were into Mystery Science Theater 3000 as kids who then got interested in older movies because that was their entry point.
Yeah.
There's a lot of, old sci-fi movies and stuff that that people never would have seen or have been introduced to without Mystery Science Theater 3000.
I'm also not allowed, like the artist known as Prince. It's one of the things you can't bad talk here in Minnesota without getting chased out of the state. So
I have strong opinions about the movie The Blues Brothers, and I have to keep them to myself because I live in Chicago.
Yeah. but this is actually a really good segue here, because there are certain movies that Mystery Science Theater covered and improved by cutting them to be shorter and making fun of them and to cover the really boring bits in the middle. And one of those is The Amazing Colossal Man.
Yeah.
Also directed by Bert I. Gordon. I don't have. I've got. Not only do I have that, but I have a pithy poll quote for you. Are you ready?
Yeah.
More like The Amazing Colossal Snooze.
Damn.
I got him.
You burnt, Bert I. Gordon.
I got Mr. Big.
Rest in piss, Bert I. Gordon.
And Mr. Small, more like. Oh.
I like this movie.
Do you really? I think this is
good.
Much better. This is much better and more watchable than the Cyclops. This
Agreed.
Is like leagues better. This is a real movie, and I think
that's part of it.
That's part of its problem is it's a real movie.
Agreed. This is a giant monster movie for 12 minutes, and it is a terminal illness drama for the other hour.
Yeah. Quickly, the plot, as according to Letterboxd, is Lieutenant Colonel Glenn Manning is inadvertently exposed to a plutonium bomb blast, and although he sustains burns over 90% of his body, he survives. Then he begins to grow. But as he grows, he starts losing his mind. This guy has the same backstory as the Incredible Hulk. Except for he's not a scientist, he's a soldier. But this is how the Hulk is made, is that there's a gamma bomb explosion accident, and he gets irradiated in almost the exact same situation.
Does he get irradiated saving someone?
Yes. He gets irradiated saving a boy who's driven onto the testing site, and he throws him into one of the ditches to save him, but doesn't get in the ditch himself and becomes the Incredible Hulk.
when we were talking about The Land Unknown, we were talking about its similarities to certain storylines in the X-Men, and we were like, were they just watching these movies? Then the answer is yes.
Well, because we're going to come up with one, not to get, no, we already did it. Kronos reminds me of Galactus. Reminds me a
Right.
lot of Galactus. So I really do think that they were just taking ideas. Again, a lot of these are really big, broad ideas, but this is so close to the Hulk and his origin story. And I think that Stan Lee gets a lot of credit for the Hulk, which and he talks about how he is just ripping off Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, but I feel like Stan Lee is just notorious for ripping off things, and he would admit to that himself. So it seems kind of likely in this case, but I just think it's funny. The thing that this is actually very strangely and kind of interestingly ripping off that I didn't think of until I read it in one of these books I have is The Incredible Shrinking Man. I hadn't considered that. The titles are even similar.
Yeah.
This is about a nuclear power mutating a regular guy and it ruining his life, and the Amazing Colossal Man, the Incredible Shrinking Man. I mean, they practically sound the same.
And a large part of this movie is his wife trying to get through to him and reach him and tell him everything's going to be okay, and him getting more and more frustrated with the situation and pushing her away. The same way with the Incredible Shrinking Man.
Right. In this case, they kind of hand wave it by saying, well, he's also going insane. Whereas in The Incredible Shrinking Man, he's going insane by the situation, not because his brain is being altered chemically or something like that. This one, they try to give him a little bit of an out as a human being, make him a little less villainous, or antagonistic. Which makes him less interesting, honestly. But anyway.
Yeah. So this movie, the reason I like this movie is, like Beginning of the End, it reaches a point where just there's no forward momentum. You're sort of just treading water for 25 to 30 minutes. But up to that point, I think the effect of the blast on him and his like sort of skin coming off, and the makeup effect of him in the operating room and his badly radiation damaged face is amazing. And then from there, we're following his wife and this very noirish. This movie feels in a lot of ways like a throwback to like the 40s or something. The lighting, the shadows, the interior monologue, the flashbacks. I think she gets flashbacks and he gets flashbacks. That all feels like a very internal psychological Laura sort of a thing. There's a little bit of like The Lady Vanishes of where she goes to the hospital one day and they all tell her that her husband isn't there and has never been there.
Yeah.
I always associate that with Bunny Lake is Missing, the Otto Preminger movie, but Bunny Lake is Missing came after this, so we'll tie it to The Lady Vanishes.
Right.
But like that is like an interesting story to suddenly happen in this giant monster movie. You know, it's you're a fucking 6-year-old boy and you put down your 5 cents to see The Amazing Colossal Man. To suddenly have this like story of gaslighting is very interesting and funny. And again, I think this is, if Bert I. Gordon taught himself how to make movies, this is his 4th movie in very short period of time, and he has improved. There are scenes where it's like there's depth of frame and the camera moves to do different setups, and I don't want to oversell this as being like up there with a Laura or like the greats of noir. Like Bert I. Gordon is not secretly some
Preminger.
Otto Preminger, certainly not, but I do think that it at least is more of a real movie, and it doesn't feel like it doesn't feel hostile towards its audience, which sometimes the Cyclops does.
And I will also say that I think that a lot of these movies live or die on the scenes of scientists explaining things. And I think these are particularly inert scenes of scientists explaining things. But
Sure.
Like you said, the scenes with his wife, the dramatic scenes, they're really over the top, but they're compelling in a way that nothing else is compelling in this movie. I like the idea of taking it that as seriously as they do.
Yeah, it's basically like a terminal illness movie where they know that he's going to die at a certain point, and he sort of has to deal with this knowledge of his imminent mortality and how it affects his relationship with his loved ones and everything. Like, it is kind of a dark victory, Bette Davis, a dark victory sort of a situation or something like that. But then at a certain point, it's like, we paid money to see the Amazing Colossal Man. So he just sort of goes crazy and sort of walks around and does some stupid giant monster stuff where he like picks up artifacts from Las Vegas. Though I do like, again, there's even some wit to the idea that Las Vegas's giant signs and billboards and neon and flashing lights of like the giant cowboy or the there's like a Maharaja on top of one of the casinos or whatever. And I do like the idea of contrasting this, this mutated man who is going crazy with these like kind of smug figures advertising these casinos.
It's definitely something that Honey, I Blew Up the Kid stole from.
Oh yeah, Honey, I Blew Up the Kid
which was written by Stuart Gordon and Brian Usna, or at least the treatment was. So, they definitely saw this.
Honey, I Shrunk the Kids is also like, well, we can do them, and we can do the Black Scorpion, and we could do all these other little. We could do the Incredible Shrinking Man.
That was going to be a Stuart Gordon movie. Both just. The idea of that is always so interesting to me, and that then Honey, I Blew Up the Kid, if I'm remembering right, was actually released around the same time Society comes out. So
I'm a little happy that he didn't do it because I feel like there would be some sort of hint that Wayne Shalinsky has like a kinky sex life or something.
Yeah, there would be. Yeah. And then we got to see what he tried when he tried to make a kid-friendly adventure movie, and it was Robot Jocks, and it was very strange. And
that was supposed to be a kid-friendly.
Yeah, it was PG.
I have not seen Robot Jocks, but I did catch a scene of it on TV when I was little, and I was flipping through channels, and I never knew what it was, and then later I figured out it was Robot Jocks, and I just remember a guy in a giant mech like bleeding out of his face, and it being like really traumatizing to watch.
Well, no, the mech falls, and it falls on the audience watching it, and there's a really gruesome shot of people just all bashed up. And I think that's, if I'm remembering right, that's where Jeffrey Combs has his cameo. There's also a butt shot, which like I remember renting Robot Jocks and like, oh fuck, that was a naked butt. Hopefully my mom didn't see. Which is funny because that was like the one thing my mom didn't care about. She didn't care about language or nudity in movies. She just didn't want me seeing sex or violence. So it wouldn't have bothered her. But
yeah, I think Joe Johnston was the correct person for Honey, I Shrunk the Kids.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think Amazing Colossal Man it doesn't work really. I find it, I guess I should say, when I say I like it, I should say I find it endearing.
Yeah.
And I the whole King Kong thing at the very end where he picks up the he's on the edge. I don't know if it's the Hoover Dam or some other dam.
I think it's Hoover Dam, probably.
He's like on the edge of the Hoover Dam, and he like picks up his wife and doesn't recognize her, and then puts her down, and then falls down, and like, I think all of that, and he there's a big long shot where he's falling into the dam, that's very silly looking, but is reminiscent of Kong falling off the Empire State Building. I like all that stuff.
Yeah, I did find it interesting that they go out of their way to say this is a plutonium bomb. I don't know what the deal is with that, but it's not an A-bomb or a hydrogen bomb is what they were actually experimenting with in the time, which is another reason I think that the gamma bomb in Hulk was ripping this off, because they also didn't use an atom bomb. And when I was a kid, I thought this, like I just mentioned this earlier, I thought the Cyclops and War of the Colossal Beast were all a trilogy just because, but this one had an actual sequel in War of the Colossal Beast, and they brought back the bald. Like, it's just weird that this man made 3 movies with giant bald guys in loincloths. It's a weird kink, man. It's very specific. And yeah, and Duncan Partkin plays the guy. I think the reason why he doesn't play the Amazing Colossal Man is because the Amazing Colossal Man actually has to emote, not just be a big monster. Which is funny because that actually makes him worse at being a big monster. He just looks like a confused man in a terry cloth.
He's kind of just sulking a lot.
Yes, it's a lot.
I don't know if you want your kaiju to sulk as much as the Amazing Colossal Man does.
Yeah, there's the line that people remember from this one is that I'm not growing, you're all shrinking. that's like a sign that he's going insane. One of my I almost it just came to me. One of my favorite things in this movie is that when they have him in the tent when he keeps getting bigger, they try to give him like the comforts of home. So they just give him like a lamp and a dresser. And I'm just thinking to myself, who the fuck is that dresser for? He can't put clothes in it. Why does he have a dresser? And it's just like that was the dollhouse furniture that the production could get their hands on. So they gave him a little dresser.
Yeah. Well, later, the best moment in this movie is they have the antidote. And unfortunately, he's too crazy now to administer it.
Uh-huh.
But they have the antidote, and they need to inject him with it. And they're like, well, he's a giant. Like, a normal syringe isn't going to do it. What amazing new technology will we have to invent to give an injection to a man whose skin is surely, 50 times as thick as a normal person's? And the answer is a giant syringe.
A very large syringe.
And the moment where he gets jabbed with it and he picks it up and looks at it and then impales someone like the Omen style.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I was cackling. I loved it.
Yeah, this is a pretty gruesome movie, actually.
I think I forget if he's in World War II or the Korean War, but he has a flashback to his war days and he shoots someone in the face.
Yeah.
And there's just blood pouring out of this person's face.
Well, and it's also got this kind of Johnny got his gun thing going on where he's having these flashbacks while he's sick in bed. And it's not he's not missing his face and his limbs like the character in that story, but it does have a sort of, that's how depressing the vibe is to the whole sequence. And his radiation burns are really pretty gross too.
Really gross.
I imagine that in color they would have looked worse than in black and white, but still.
I never looked this up until just now. The Wikipedia claims that Roger Corman was originally going to be director, and regular Roger Corman collaborator Charles B. Griffith wrote a comedic version of this.
Well, that's funny because there is a comedic version of this.
What's the comedic?
Attack of the 50-Foot Woman.
Oh, yes, of course. Yeah, Attack of the 50-Foot Woman is its own weird thing that unfortunately came after 1957, so we don't get to talk about how accidentally almost hitting an alien with your car gets you giant.
Yeah.
That is a bizarre movie.
It is. But I think that one's supposed to be kind of funny. I've always been under the impression that it was.
Yes. I can't recall if I've already talked about this, but part of the downfall of the subgenre is when they start to do parody, and I think Attack of the 50-Foot Woman is 58 or 59 and is like a pretty clear indicator of what audiences thought about these plots by then.
The funny thing is the lead doctor from this, William Hudson, who is the guy you get when you can't afford Fred McMurray, his three best lookalikes, or Jet Kennedy. He was the husband in Attack of the 50-Foot Woman, so I feel like there has to be the people making Attack of the 50-Foot Woman did that on purpose. There's no.
What's really funny?
What
is as a young dork, right? Yeah. And I'm interested in the cult movies I'm interested in, and I'm seeing this older generation, and they're interested in older cult movies, and they're more into the movies of the 50s and everything. And I look at some of these people, these Gen Xers or even older. Who have these attachments and these encyclopedic knowledges of all these actors, and I'm watching them, and I'm watching, Beast from 20,000 Fathoms or The Giant Claw, and I'm going, how can you tell any of these actors apart? They all are identical. The idea that you have a fondness for one square-jawed military man versus another is ludicrous. And we're totally becoming this. Or I'm like, hey, Mara Corday, Gloria Talbot. All right.
It was so funny. I don't think I talked about this, but I had a Facebook friend who's a lesbian who was complaining that she can't get into classic films because there's always some rotted husk of a man with Grace Kelly as the love interest. And I was like, that's what every one of these movies feels like.
Yeah.
When you're watching them, is like, here's a beautiful woman and a man who looks like a fifth-rate Fred McMurray, who already isn't exactly the most handsome man in the world, and kind of his appeal is that he's not the most handsome man in the world, but we're going to pretend he's attractive here. I don't know.
That's definitely the monster that challenged the world.
Yes. God, fucking. I was just listening to the edit on that, which will probably be on the other one. But I couldn't remember Mickey Rooney, but that man is just Mickey Rooney, as Mickey Rooney as an adult, and he doesn't like it. Okay, so back on topic.
Monolith Monsters.
Talking about Yeah. I should just. Kathy Downs is the sad wife in this one, and she had just made Sheet Creature for AIP, like just before she made this, I believe. And then I already said who the lead doctor is, William Holden. There's Larry Thor is in this, and he was an accomplished actor, but he was mostly a newscaster and narrator, so he has one of those voices that you recognize first. And Hank Peterson from Green Acres and Petticoat Junction has another cameo in this one, and he does the classic gag where he sees the colossal man and he's drinking.
Yes.
Looks at the bottle and says he swears off liquor.
I'm not prepared to say this is the first one,
but it's got to be up there.
It's got to be up there.
It feels like something that maybe Looney Tunes made up, honestly.
I could see that. Maybe the Michigan J. Frog inspired someone to put down the wine bottle.
It's actually the only joke in the whole movie, basically.
True.
Well, let's move on to another good one. And this was another big surprise. This one and Kronos and Black Scorpion, and to a lesser extent, Deadly Mantis were my four surprises. Like four movies that I had never seen that really stuck out.
I'm in the same boat all the way. I had not seen any of those four, and I think they're all good. And Monolith Monsters is the one that you discount just reading the synopsis. So why don't you read the synopsis and have the people hear what an exciting story Monolith Monsters has.
Rocks from a meteor which grow when in contact with water threaten a sleepy southwestern desert community. That's all we get.
Growing rocks.
Just rocks. Just some rocks.
No faces.
Nope.
Not rock people.
Nope. Not rock monsters. Not what were those things called? Inhumanoids. They're not inhumanoids.
Not inhumanoids. They're not rocks sent from outer space by intelligent aliens.
No. They're just something that shouldn't be on our planet. Sherwood was a second unit guy, and he only directed 3 movies. This one, Raw Edge, which is a Western that I've never seen, and The Creature Walks Among Us, which is the second Creature from the Black Lagoon movie, I think. Yeah, that's the third in the series. So second sequel. You're the one who's supposed to know this, Patrick. You're the Universal Monsters, but then again, we just had this conversation about how Creature from the Black Lagoon isn't a Universal Monster. So
yeah,
okay.
In my view, that cycle ends in 1949.
Right. This Monolith Monsters was a double feature with An Incredible Shrinking Man, which is a pretty good double feature, I think.
Hell yeah!
And Jack Arnold did the original Creature from the Black Lagoon. So I assume there's part of me that wonders if he was going to direct this at some point.
And the story is by him.
Yeah, that's right. And he wrote the story. So that makes me wonder if he was going to direct this and then passed it off to the guy who did the sequel to his movie because he liked what he did or so. I don't know if Jack Arnold had any real impact on the Creature sequels, but one might think that they at least asked him to make them.
What was Jack Arnold's career post Incredible Shrinking Man? Because Incredible Shrinking Man was the kind of thing where it was sort of the high watermark for sci-fi at Universal, and also like the beginning of the end because they started saying, you know what, these sci-fi movies are more trouble than they're worth. As we talked about with The Land Unknown, with that budget getting cut.
I mean, he did The Mouse That Roared, which is a personal favorite. He does I see a couple.
Oh, so he did
dramas.
The Space Children, Monster on Campus. So he wasn't done with. He did some episodes of World of Giants. Okay, so he wasn't done with sci-fi at this point. So it's not that he outgrew it.
But he also did a lot of action, adventure kind of stuff. Apparently, he made the Rowan and Martin at the movies. I don't even know. Is that them just talking about? Yeah, I don't care.
Suck it to me, Dr. Zhivago.
Yeah.
This is a movie that has a very dull premise, dull sounding premise, which is just what if rocks kept growing, you know, like those crystal sets you get from the science store at the mall.
Which is pretty sure what the effects are in this movie. It's just those things you get.
But it has a certain integrity to it that is very admirable, where it cares about the characters and it cares about making you care about them. And it is all about this setting. It's all about the small town. It's all about the people who feel trapped there. It's about the former salt mine that used to be there. And the geologist, I think, is the specific branch of science that this person works at.
Mm-hmm.
like feeling stuck in this small town. He's in love with this little school marm, but they have this will they won't they romance to it, and all of that is not just filler, because this is all happening simultaneously with like the very first shot of the movie. Well, actually, the beginning of the movie has some really funny Ed Wood style narration. My favorite line is "from time to time, from the beginning of time," which definitely sounds like something that Creswell would say at the beginning of Plan 9.
Yeah.
From time to time, from the beginning of time. So it's got one of those like open narrations about science or, whatever that a lot of these movies have. But the meteor crash lands in this area, and we see one of those rocks, and the camera pushes into it, and a car stops over it, and water from the carburetor drips onto it. And by the time this guy has left, the guy in the car has left, the stone that has water on it has already grown. And you don't know what it's about, but it's like a very intriguing little, because ultimately these are rocks that suck silicon from water and from all the sorts of things, and that's how they grow. So that's why if you touch them, like you turn into a rock like statue, because it has sucked all the silicone from your body and your skin is now inflexible.
But and that actually, I don't know if you want to even talk about this, but there's kind of a body horror aspect to it.
Yes,
I really appreciate. And we talked about how there's sort of an implied chemical warfare aspect to 20 million miles to Earth, where there is some sort of disease that has caught on, but it doesn't really go anywhere. And there's a thing with that too, where this isn't just a bad thing in the fact that these stones will eventually, I guess, encompass the Earth is the idea. They will absorb all the moisture and silicon from the Earth. But if you touch them, you slowly, you die, and you die in a crappy, horrible way, and your body breaks apart. And it's very, when the first guy they find is very John Carpenter's The Thing kind of vibe to it, that like there's this no, it's really the body horror aspect is something that I don't see in these other movies. It's really about the big monster is going to eat you, or the stuff, or the radiation is going to kill you.
There's a certain feeling of dread. If the idea of like a giant insect, if part of what makes insects scary to humans is that they feel so inhuman, is that they don't feel like they have any empathy, like you can't reason with an insect. You look an insect in the eyes and you see nothing, unlike, you could look a dog in the eyes and project a full emotional life, but an insect is just there to eat and devour. Like the rocks are like that taken one step further, where it's like the sense of dread of these growing rocks and the possibility of what can happen as they expand is existential in a way that it is more like Kronos, in fact. Where Kronos is sort of so dehumanized that it's like kind of upsetting to think about.
And they're both going to just destroy the entire environment and make the world unlivable, basically, is the threat they pose. It's not that they're going to bash up our buildings and eat people. They're just going to make the planet unlivable.
It's also like a very fast-paced movie. Like I said, like all these things are happening simultaneously. They realize that there's a little girl who finds one of these rocks and she takes it home. And when they get to her the next day, her home has been destroyed because the rock has grown huge and destroyed it, and her parents are dead, and she is starting to turn to stone. It's like a flesh-eating virus, basically.
Yeah, yeah.
And so she's in an iron lung, and so we have this ticking clock of like, we have the small-scale ticking clock of how are we going to save this little girl, and then we have the large-scale ticking clock of this little girl's fate will be all our fate if we don't figure this out. And it's like immediately we have everyone has accepted what the premise is, the sci-fi premise. We have moved on past praying mantises couldn't possibly be that big, like kind of aspect of the story. And it's just everything is, and then a thunderstorm happens.
Yeah.
It's like after we've done all these bits and pieces and set all this stuff up, then it's like, and then the worst possible thing happens, which is all of these rocks are getting massive amounts of rain.
It's the thing that I talked about with my friend Justin when we talked about disaster movies of the 70s in particular, but we talked about some of the 90s ones too, is that they have this whole frying pan into the fire aspect to them, where everything just keeps getting worse. The worst thing that could possibly happen happens just when we think the humans are gonna not the humans, the people are going to survive. There's some of that going on here and in Kronos, which I think makes them a little ahead of their time. I don't think that was what they did in a lot of disaster or alien invasion movies at the time. There was like ticking clocks, but there wasn't like as long as this doesn't happen, and then that thing happens, and now they have to figure out another way around the problem.
Yeah, I mean, you talked about disaster movies. Like, I think I've mentioned this at some point earlier on, where it's like some giant monster movies are animal attack movies, and some giant monster movies are disaster movies.
Yeah,
like that original Godzilla movie, that's a disaster movie. There's something so overwhelming about it that it is not just an entity fighting us. It is just like a massive national crisis that must be dealt with. And this is a disaster movie all the way, to the point where this is maybe the one that I was like, does this count as a giant monster movie?
right.
It is, because it's basically mountains growing, and it's like, it's not a giant mountain, it's just a mountain. But I do think it exists in this context of all these other sci-fi movies, and I do think that like there's a lot of the same moves. It's it doesn't feel like a movie about an avalanche. It feels like a movie about aliens from outer space.
Right. Faceless, horrible aliens. I think that the filmmakers might deserve some credit for inspiring The Blob. I don't know if it actually inspired The Blob, but that similar faceless, ever-growing monolith monster that's from space that just keeps eating, basically. And then that's also the Mario Bava movie, Kaltiki, the Immortal Monster. In the case of Kaltiki, the special effects, I wrote a note, are basically Mr. Wizard experiments blown up to look huge, which is what, I don't know. Have you ever seen Kaltiki?
I love it, Kaltiki.
Yeah, there's a lot of that. It feels like science, like science experiments you could do at home, but blown up and projected over other things. It's that
the rock effects in this are, I mean, it doesn't have to be super ambitious, because unlike all the other things, they don't have to move around. They don't have to be articulated in a way that a monster with limbs needs to articulate. Mm-hmm. But the long shots of the miniatures of the town, and then you see in the distance these like giant pillars of stone rising up above them and then crumbling, and and it's all shot in at a high frame rate, so it's all in this like really ominous slow motion as these pillars of rock start crumbling and stuff. I think all that is really cool looking.
It's such a good, well shot movie that I thought this would be another one where I'd find out it was an Oscar winner. Cinematographer LSW Carter, he was not an award winner, but honestly, it's another case where like the photography looking good goes like the extra mile, I think.
And I think honestly, like, this isn't necessarily because The Deadly Mantis, I think, was a major studio film, but I do think the junkiest of these movies comes from the independent space, and which it might be a flip of how we now traditionally think of studio versus independent films, which is like the independent films are the more human and personal and with more personality, and the studio movies are made by just giant machines just cranking out content.
Yeah.
But in this case, when I'm looking at this list of 1957 giant monster movies, I feel like the ones that come from major studios have a certain level of this is Universal International, we have to tell a story. Yeah. And then the ones that come from the independents are like, actually, this is AIP, and we could do Attack of the Crab Monsters.
Yeah. we can purposely cut out any exposition from our script ahead of time.
And sometimes, the real movie as it exists is like boring as hell. Because you're not actually interested in the people involved, and you're like, I don't know if the real movie is the reason The Deadly Mantis works. But like in the case of the Monolith Monsters, it gets a lot of mileage out of, at every point, it's clear that the people who made this cared about making it good.
Yeah, just before I forget, the trivia thing is you're talking about the special effects. The two big special effects that aren't Mr. Wizard experiments are from other movies. The meteor crash is from It Came from Outer Space, and the dam explosion is from something called Born to Be Wild. And then scenes from this are in the movie They Live, and I have to rewatch They Live and look for it now. But you're talking about how these are better movies because of the stories. I think this is another case where the cast is up to par. I think that there are scientific exposition scenes that are way more engaging here than they are in most of these movies. And I think it's just that the fact that the actors are acting and they're playing characters who are excited about the stuff they're finding out instead of just lifelessly mumbling and pointing at slides and maps because they got to get a paycheck and go home. And there's a really funny gag. It's like the only joke in the whole movie. But they call a meteorologist to ask when the rain is going to stop, and he just keeps pulling out charts and explaining further and further. That kind of makes me think they were making fun of these other movies where it's like, and then this is going to happen, and blah, and it's just the boringest shit in the world. And he's just making it difficult on them because they need to fucking know now. Like, is it going to be soon or not? You know?
Yeah. I think that's something that like this shares with the Black Scorpion is like. Usually these existential threats are dealt with from the top down, where it's just like we have all the top military brass sitting in a circle on a table. And then we have the main scientist sort of giving a presentation to them with charts. And in this case, it's specifically like, oh, I know what's going on and you know what's going on. But if we let anyone else know what's going on, it's going to be mass hysteria. So let's just keep this under our hats. And even at a certain point, like the California Highway Patrol are sort of involved, and they're like, what's going on? And they're like, it's okay. Just give us your radios.
Don't worry about it.
We're still in charge here, even though you are like the highest government authority in this point. But like, just let us use your radios because we need to get the word out about this and that. And then at some point, there's like a little grassroots thing where all of the little paper boys are all like riding their bikes around.
Yeah.
They're like, "Come on, fellas!"
More little kids that just want to get paid. There's a whole.
Oh, that's right.
There's a moment where one of the kids is like, "Ah, we could help, but it would be a lot better if you gave us some money to help."
Total Pepe moment.
Yeah, you know what? At that exact moment, what I wrote in my notes was, it dawns on me that all these kids are baby boomers. And maybe this is why they ruined the economy. Maybe we let them think that it was too important to make $1 rather than helping the community overcome the monolith monsters. Maybe there was a problem here with the way the world was working at the time when they were little kids.
They just came about in a time of economic prosperity, and that was what the world was to them.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. I don't know. It just was a theory I came up with.
It makes sense to me.
I mean, part of the fun of this whole podcast series is to look for the unifying themes in these films and the subtext of which there's quite a bit in this movie, but they don't go into like nukes or anything like that. But there is an interesting moment during the climax that they might not be able to save the world because the dam they have to blow is privately owned and there's a lot of equity in it, and there isn't enough backlash to consider like this kind of a political statement, you know, but there is sort of a moment where they just say, well, we're just going to blow it up anyway.
Yeah.
Because we don't have time to ask their permission. And it's there's not a lot of, nothing really comes of that, but there is a moment where the world might come to an end because we have to get permission to blow up this dam that's owned by a private company. The solution to this ends up being a saline solution, which is if they rush a bunch of water through salt mines, it'll create salt water, and the salt water will stop the growth of these rocks. Which I suppose means the rocks would stop when they got to the ocean. Huh.
But I didn't
think of that until right now.
I guess
it would just ruin all of North and South America.
Also, it might go over the Arctic.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good point.
But at any rate, the original script for this movie actually involved the Salton Sea, which is the setting of the monster that challenged the world.
Right.
And originally it was set around the Salton Sea, and they had and the climax was like people with dump trucks like filling up with salt water and bringing it out. And then at a certain point, cooler heads prevailed, and we're like, oh, that sounds like a lot of extras. What if we just use stock footage of a dam bursting? And it's like,
from
all right, good enough.
We already own.
Yeah.
Another very interesting thing about this movie is its male lead is Grant Williams from The Incredible Shrinking Man. And
that's right.
A completely different character in this. He goes from this like sad wretch who is really hard to like in Incredible Shrinking Man to this really sympathetic, likable, almost jovial guy for a lot of the movie. He, when things get bad, he gets pretty serious, but he's just generally more likable, and it really helps. They don't. I don't remember. I was listening really hard because I don't remember them ever saying he was a geologist, but all the plot descriptions say he's a geologist. I was under the impression that the other guy he works with is a geologist, and that he does some sort of like work at the state park, like he's like a ranger, is what I was under the impression of. But I guess
Possibly. I could have it wrong.
I think it takes place in a fictional town too. I don't think it's a real place that it's supposed to be in like out rural California is supposed to be, I think, where it's supposed to be taking place. And then the female lead is a teacher. That doesn't happen here, but that is one of the jobs that women are allowed to have in these movies, is a teacher.
Yeah.
So that kind of reminded me of The Birds.
Oh, sure.
That this is kind of like that love story that we have only implied in The Birds, with it that has fallen apart off screen before we meet the characters. She doesn't have a lot to do, and she kind of becomes a stand-in mother, which is a thing we have. It's similar to the thing in Monster That Challenged the World, where there's a single mother, and we have to feel sorry for her because she's a single mother, but that's the only thing that can make her a viable romantic partner for the lead, is that she's not already married, I guess. We went into that when we talked about that.
It's possible the little girl in this movie was inspired by the little girl in Them, who's encountered the ants but has been sort of rendered catatonic by the trauma and can't speak. And the thing that having her as a school teacher does is sort of like bring all of these relationships closer knit and make it feel, have that more small town feel and have more immediate emotional stakes, rather than like, I'm a police officer and I found a little girl and it's my duty to help her.
Right.
Which again is like part of the whole personality of this movie.
And it's more interesting to have her not be the parent, honestly.
Yeah.
I don't know if that was just a way like having her be a divorced parent or a widow would be too weird. Let's not do that. But I think it was really just that they thought it was more interesting to have her be the teacher. She's played by Laura Albright, who was Edie Hart on the Peter Gunn TV show and was in a bunch of Peter Gunn movies, spin-off movies and stuff. And related to that, the score here, which is particularly good, was partially composed by Henry Mancini, who made the Peter Gunn theme, as well as the Pink Panther theme and Moon River and the love theme from Romeo and Juliet. So a lot of good shit going on there.
There we go. We got an Oscar winner.
Yeah, I suppose. Yeah, there we go.
I guess I don't have anything more to add about. Oh, I was just going to say that the only downside of the Monolith Monsters is that it is a giant monster movie where the giant monsters are just rocks that grow. If some of these movies are like you suffer through the human bits to see all of the cool killer animal bits, this is a movie where it's like, oh man, these human bits are really good, and I like the rock effects, but like there's nothing awesome about this movie.
The climax is pretty good, but yeah, there's a lot of like there's
not any part of this movie that you're going to be like, oh yeah. It's a little bit more low wattage than that.
Yeah, for sure. The next movie we were going to cover, but it's a lost movie, which is Tokyo 1960, which is a re-edited version of Godzilla that was made for Filipino audiences.
Do you know if it was a re-edited version of Godzilla in that it was like Godzilla King of the Monsters, or do you know if they like changed the plot drastically?
I think it was... I was under the impression that they changed the plot and just reused the footage. But, this thing says in a similar fashion to America's King of the Monsters. So, maybe I'm wrong. I guess, putting Filipino actors in place in the speaking roles it sounds like what they were trying to do.
Oh, okay.
So there wasn't like a, what's his name, as the one
Raymond
American.
Burr.
Yeah, there wasn't a Raymond. It doesn't sound like they had a Raymond Burr. It sounds like they just threw in some Filipino actors for speaking roles.
I think we've talked about Godzilla plenty across all these episodes, so that's good enough.
It would have been fun to see this, but it just seems like it doesn't exist. Like it's just something people know got made, and that's it.
How about we do the next best thing?
Which is...
Talk about the Mysterians.
Which is, I'm going to brutalize. I'm bad at Japanese, but Chikiyu Boigun. And this is Ishihiro Honda, the hero of kaiju movies, the OG amazing man behind the original Godzilla, and
If this film series is sort of about the peak and death of the American giant monster movie, this is the man who is the reason why people still like giant monster movies.
yeah, basically, he made a lot of the best of the best. He made Godzilla and Rodan right in a row in 1956, and then in '57, Toho was doing Godzilla raids again, but they got Motoyoshi Oda to do that one. And I don't think they planned on doing, they just wanted to make more and more kaiju movies. They didn't really have a plan in to make more and more Godzilla movies, as I understand it. They kind of like put Godzilla to bed for quite a while and tried to make other things. There was like Varan the Incredible, and then there's Mothra, which was also done by Honda. So with Varan was also done by Honda. So Honda basically just kept on trying to make the next Godzilla. And so well, I think we can talk more about Honda in a moment, but I will set this one up. And the what they describe on Letterboxd is, in Japan, scientifically advanced invaders from the war-destroyed planet of Mysterioid cause an entire village to vanish, then send a giant robot out to storm the city by night. After which they request a small patch of land on Earth and the right to marry Earthling women, claiming to be pacifists. I sometimes confuse this movie with Koji Shima's Warning from Space, which was released the year before, and I think is considered the first Japanese sci-fi movie. I guess that they don't really count Godzilla as a sci-fi movie. And that one is more of a body snatcher movie, though. And it's also very clearly Japanese answer to The Day the Earth Stood Still. The aliens in that are basically starfish people. It's very abstract. It was actually, I think, an avant-garde artist designed the starfish people. This is much more kind of what you get in the earliest. This is like an early in version of what you would get in Super Sentai type things, and what would become Ultraman. I think that there's a little bit of very early Ultraman kind of ideas in this. That this is kind of an overlooked movie and not necessarily one of the best Honda movies, but you could see some ideas here that would end up kind of seeding into Godzilla movies as Godzilla became more sci-fi oriented. These particular aliens are like a lot like the aliens from Planet X, for example.
Yeah, Godzilla versus the Astro Monster is what I have written down here. They wear the same sunglasses.
Yeah, and they kind of look like Power Rangers. They have colored suits and hooded helmets. They're bad guys, and they're not controlling. They don't really control the robot from inside. And my memory was that they controlled the robot from inside, but it's just like a robot that runs around punching things.
So this is a movie that I think on most levels sucks. But it has a great score. Mm-hmm. It has absolutely phenomenal special effects. Holy cow, the miniatures in I'm so glad that this came last, because like so much of the American films of this era are like, how do we do this without spending a lot of money? How do we?
The Japanese movies are A pictures. As soon as Godzilla was a hit, Japanese film studios just didn't have the money Hollywood did, but these are their A pictures for sure. These were not B.
It's not like, well, okay, we have the one really good giant mantis, and then we're going to work ourselves around that. Mm-hmm. And like the rest of the movie will sort of fall into place, I guess, but really we're about this one giant puppet that we built or whatever. Like the Mysterians is like the art direction and the effects, and this is the only movie in color that we're covering.
Yeah.
The color photography is sumptuous and gorgeous and beautiful. Like, as just I want to experience a kaiju thing that is sort of groovy and aesthetically pleasing, the Mysterians is absolutely phenomenal, despite the fact that it doesn't really have anything in the way of characters or story, and it kind of is just a series of things that happens and then it ends.
Yeah, and from what I understand, I think this was made in an effort to compete with American science fiction movies rather than to cash in on Godzilla and Rodan's success. That the way it's described in the couple books I found information about it. It's really being described as a sci-fi movie and not a monster movie. That's partially why it was in color, I suppose. Fun facts: the monster here is Moguera or Morguera, and he's not to be confused with Moguera, who is a pseudo Mechagodzilla from the Godzilla versus the Space Monster, which is a much later, I believe, either late 80s, early 90s Godzilla movie. But they reused the name, and in that case, it is an acronym for Mobile Operated Godzilla Universal Expert Robot Aerotype. So that Moguera actually looks a lot like this one. So they definitely took the drill nose and the drill hands that this one has. They reuse those. So it's not just a coincidental name reuse. That the people who made that movie definitely had this movie in mind.
The first time this interacted with the Godzilla universe was the 1989 NES game, Godzilla King of Monsters.
Yes. And I apparently, well, I'm going to save that for last. I'll bring that up last. That's the, there was going to
okay. This is more your department than mine. I recently went to a marathon where we watched all of the Showa era Godzilla movies in a row, and so like I'm pretty well caught up on what those movies are, but they've never been like a passion of mine that I know a lot about. So I'm sort of letting you take charge on this one.
Well, and so I think that what you're talking about with the special effects, I think a lot of that comes down to the way Honda knew how to shoot things from the victim's level in a lot of things. It's something that doesn't work with some. Well, I still love a lot of Godzilla movies that do this. Some of the lesser Godzilla directors would shoot from higher up, and so we were looking down, and they really look like just guys in suits. And I think that Honda had an idea to shoot from below, or at least from the side, in a way that made them always look bigger. But I will say that the destruction stuff does get a little monotonous in this one. They put a lot of time and effort into the machines that cannot hurt Moguera being just shooting at him constantly. I have a book that's called "The Monsters Are Attacking Tokyo," where the author Stuart Galbraith IV points out that this film was the first time Honda works with the idea that the monster attack is affecting the entire world and not just Japan. And that was something that apparently Honda was really, really focused on. And there is a line this was Honda reacting to the Cold War. So this isn't necessarily like Godzilla, which is about nukes. This is about the possibility of danger coming and the other, all the countries not dealing with it. And there's even a line later in the movie where the guy says the US and the USSR have to realize that they exist on the same planet as us. So there is a lot of political stuff going on here, and I think it's kind of interesting that it's not quite, it's anchored in Japan, but it's an international incident. And I don't think, I would say Deadly Mantis is an international incident just because it flies to America, and so I guess Canada is also involved. And Kronos has some international stuff going on, but for the most part, these movies all the other movies take place in a part of America or Mexico, and it's pretty centralized. So that's a cool thing that I didn't notice and had to have a guide.
Do you think so? The opening of this movie is like there's this very traditional street festival. And it's this very elaborate small town street festival that gets interrupted by this. I forget exactly. Is it the forest fire is started by the aliens, or the forest fire?
It's either started by the alien
or the aliens.
It's started by the guy who we find out has betrayed humanity for the aliens, I believe.
Do you think like that is the idea of like, here is Japan as it was? This is 1957. The wounds of World War II are still tender, and the place of Japan in a post-war world is still up in the air a little bit.
Yeah.
Do you think that this is like an idea of anxiety about Japan and its place on the world stage?
For sure.
In 1957, and like that introduction is part of that. Like, this is where we were, and this is no longer who we are.
Yeah, that's a good point because there is like a fire that could be like a nuclear fire. Yeah, that's a good. I didn't think of it that way, but yeah, it's definitely a movie about anxiety of Japan's place in the world, and not just Japan's place in the world as a leader, but Japan's place in the world as feeling like they don't have any say in anything because they hadn't until very recently. I don't remember exactly when the U.S. handed things back over. I don't know if it had happened yet in 1957. So yeah, that's the interesting stuff. But the plot itself is kind of like it's a little weird. It's about some aliens that saw some ladies at a street festival
That's really the thing.
and decided they like later they just kidnap a bunch of women, but it's initially they asked for these specific women that they saw at this street festival that they want to marry. So like, we'll destroy your planet if these 5 specific women don't date us. We swear to God.
They decided the first 4 women they ever saw in their lives were the most beautiful women to ever live.
And they took the incel route and threatened the safety of the entire planet.
It's extremely funny, the incel factor of this movie, where they are like, you have to understand, we are a tragically fallen race, and our fertility has been destroyed by the H-bomb. And we as a race will go extinct unless we are able to repopulate. And we have so much that we can offer the planet Earth in exchange. This could be progress that sends us both into the future. By the way, we want these 4 women specifically.
Specifically.
You're going to repopulate your race with 5 women? That's not an exchange program. What we need to do is establish a long and huge series of mixers in which we can... Like, this courtship cannot be you plucking 5 women and then we are told that you are repopulating your species and we're going, well, I guess that's what they're up to. Like, it is so fucking wild, that pivot.
Yeah, and Wikipedia claims that this inspired the movie Mars Needs Women, but I don't know if that's true. But it does have a sort of similar plot to that movie, which then became fodder for that terrible Gary Shandling movie that I think you covered on 96 Greers.
What Planet Are You From is one of the first episodes of 96 Greers, absolutely. I think there are other sci-fi movies as well that we have not covered on this because they're not giant monster movies that are built around the idea of fading fertility and these aliens sort of grappling with human libidos. I think I Married a Monster from Outer Space is one of those. Yeah. I think
that one's more just like lustful. Like, they don't need to repopulate. They don't have any excuse. They're just like,
I think Brain from Planet Eros is from 1957 is a similar thing. Where it's like, it's literally the planet Eros, it's like, it's a horny brain that needs to possess men so it can have sex with women. This is a trope that I think is sort of bouncing around sci-fi movies of the era.
It is very strange. It's half-baked is what I would say the plot is. And they sort of changed that. They actually kidnap a whole bunch of women throughout the movie. The plot implies this isn't a great movie for the women characters, but they were played by stars. Like, they got good name actresses to play these poor women. Yumi,
but it is in stark contrast to what's happening in America in these films. As far as like, these women do not have personalities.
No. Yeah, they got Yumi Sukawara, who was in this Rodan and Goreth and the H-Man all in a row. And then Momoko Kochi was a major character in Godzilla, who then reprised her role in Godzilla vs. Destroya. There's a bunch of these actors are in not just Honda films, but Kurosawa films. They ended up sharing a lot of actors over the years. I don't know. I guess I don't know who you would call the lead in this. The big name is Takeshi Shimura, who is the guy from all those Kurosawa movies, Seven Samurai, Rashomon. He's also in Godzilla. He's the older guy in Godzilla. But I guess the lead is the Kenji Sahara character, who is the young scientist, who also plays scientists, I believe. Well, he's in Godzilla and Rodan, but I guess you would call him the lead. And then Honda reuses a lot of these people over and over and over again through all the Godzilla movies.
I have one other 96 Greers connection.
Yeah.
which is 96 Greers, comes from the song 96 Tears by question mark in the Mysterians. the 60s group.
Who probably named themselves after at least seeing a poster of this movie.
They named themselves after this movie. They absolutely did.
Well, there you go. That's pretty funny. So yeah, you said something about the music being good. That was Akira Ifukube, who did Godzilla, the classic 2 Godzilla songs that they reuse in every single Godzilla movie, including
As well
one.
they should.
Yeah. I'm actually disappointed that they only used it in the King of the Monsters for the new American movies. They kind of ignored. They don't use a lot of the old Ifukube music. Maybe that's why I like that one the best, because they're reusing music from movies I like.
What is Ifukube's greater achievement? The music from Godzilla or Godzilla's roar?
God, they're both just so iconic.
Right.
But yeah, the roar is probably
the roar's insane.
Yeah.
It's so good.
Yeah. It's probably the most iconic thing. Well, I have another book called The Big Book of Japanese Monster Movies, The Lost Films, by someone named John LeMay. And this is literally a collection that this author, who's LeMay is like an expert on kaiju movies. He has a collection of information of kaiju movies that were never finished. And he details a unfilmed 1990 movie that was called Godzilla versus the Mysterians. The plot would have followed the remnant of the Mysterians, who settled underground in Nevada, where they can conduct tests for the future of their race. The tests also produce grotesque genetic hybrids, one of which they plan to use to conquer the Earth. Thinking that Godzilla's immunity to radiation holds the key to their survival, the Mysterians kidnap him from Monster Island, prompting Rodan and Anguirus to head to Nevada to rescue him. And it would have had it would have ended on a big battle over the Hoover Dam, the Grand Canyon, and the Vegas Strip, which the Grand Canyon didn't come up, but those other 2 did. But the behind the scenes story, I'm just going to quote LeMay basically verbatim here. I'll credit to him. But the script was written and pitched by music video director Mick Anger, who I believe is British, but was hired in Dentsu, Japan, to film 2 live performances of Whitney Houston over December of 1989. So I think he had done Whitney Houston music videos, and they liked the music videos, so they wanted him to film this stuff. While he was there, he saw Godzilla versus Biollante, which he didn't like, which he's objectively wrong about, because that's the best of the Heisei movies. But anyway, this prompted him to write an outline that night in his hotel room, which led him to, because Dentsu, the company that was hired him to do these concert videos, they heard that he had this project in mind, and they used their influence to get him a tour at Toho. So this just random British music video director gets a thing where he has to meet the effects director Koichi Kawakita, and apparently they didn't like it very much, and he thinks it was because LeMay thinks it was because Toho was not interested in a screenplay written by a foreigner, which is probably true, and that they thought it would be really expensive, which is also true. But it kind of sounds like an okay idea for an American set Godzilla movie, except for I just don't think Mysterians were a particularly memorable thing outside of Japan.
No.
So I don't know why he chose the Mysterians. He must have just liked that particular movie. I don't know. But it was weird that there was very briefly considered to be this bizarre sequel to be made. I don't think it was ever really seriously considered, but it's just funny.
Last question, something that just occurred to me, because I watched Crazed Fruit recently.
Okay.
Is it possible, because this is the era of the Sun Tribe films, the sort of Japanese equivalent of something like Rebel Without a Cause or The Wild One, these films about these sort of rebellious Japanese teenagers. Is it possible that The Mysterians is like a Sun Tribe film, but not from the perspective of the teenagers, but the teenagers are the aliens? Because I was just thinking about the sunglasses and thinking about the sexual demands and the sort of violent threats that back these demands and stuff. And I'm like, And I was thinking about Crazed Fruit, and I'm like, is it possible that this is like? I mean, it's coming out of the same Japan as these Sun Tribe movies.
Yeah.
Is it possible that that's part of the miasma that's producing this?
Yeah, I suppose. I mean, that makes some sense. Those movies are really start picking up in the early '60s too. I mean, I think that there's a little bit of the superhero thing. The Supergiant series was starting the exact same year this came out, but I think
Crazed Fruit was 56, so that's why maybe
yeah. I mean, it makes sense. I don't know if that was specifically what they went for, but yeah, the idea that it is in the miasma, I like that. Yeah,
all right.
Could be.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess that's the end. We watched 2 other movies. Each of us watched one of them. They did not have giant monsters.
No.
One was Half Human, the story of the abominable snowman,
which is in the style of Godzilla King of the Monsters, a Japanese horror movie directed by Ishirō Honda, that has a bunch of American stuff shot for it, inserted into it. Absolutely horrible re-edit of this movie. The original film is not intact in the way that Godzilla King of the Monsters you can still kind of watch and follow. This is just like totally butchered and brutalized. Do not watch that movie.
And then I watched, as I mentioned, The Incredible Petrified World by Jerry Warren, which was just an all-around bad movie that had the interesting factoid about the actress who played Lois Lane. It was also filmed in Colossal Cave, which is in Tucson, so I had to mention that. But otherwise, not much going on in that one. So that is our look at the giant monster movies of 1957 as we could watch them. So one we didn't cover because I already covered it. One we couldn't find because it doesn't exist anymore.
But a pretty comprehensive look at a pretty seminal year. I think people, I think when the history of horror is discussed, I think often the 50s are painted with a very broad brush as just, and then the 50s happened, and now let's get back to what we really consider horror, which is the 60s.
Right.
I think people have a conceptualization of the 30s and 40s and of the 60s and 70s and certainly 80s, 90s, all that. But I feel like the 50s kind of gets all talked about as if it is the same thing. And I like the opportunity to dive deep and see actually what was going on at that time.
Yeah. And I was surprised. I was afraid that I wasn't going to enjoy this one because they were so similar. And the few I had seen, like the Giant Claw, were particularly awful. But then there's some good surprises. Yeah, I come out saying, I think that 20 Million Miles of Earth and Incredible Shrinking Man are 2 movies people already knew were pretty good, solid movies. And I think Quatermass 2 has a pretty good reputation. But for me, it was really about Kronos, Black Scorpion, and Monolith Monsters.
Seek out Black Scorpion. Black Scorpion kicks ass.
Yeah.
And I don't think it has like a Region A Blu-ray.
I don't believe it does.
It should. It's amazing.
So yeah, that will bring us to the end. And since this is going to be 3 parts, but I'm only recording 2 parts with Patrick, we're just going to record the exact same outro here. And so this is either the end of part 2 or part 3. So if you've heard this before, Patrick, where can they find you?
They can find me at 96 Greers. 96 Greers is the name of my podcast that I'm a co-host of, where we watch every single feature film with Judy Greer in the cast. They can find that at 96 Greers. That's all spelled out, no numbers. 96greers.podbean.com. They can find me on Instagram at Uptown Song Club. They can find me on Blue Sky at Uptown Song Club.
And then, as per usual, you can find me at the Genre Grinder website, at the Genre Grinder Facebook page, I guess the Genre Grinder Twitter page, which is at Genre Grinder. That I don't use my personal Twitter very often, but I do have a Blue Sky as Gabe Powers. Got in there early enough. And I have a letterbox under Gabe Powers, and we have a Genre Grinder / Gabe Powers Instagram at Genre Grinder Gabe. Until next time, just watch out for big animals. If they get too big, it's just no good.
No good. Medium-sized animals, everybody.
Yep. I'm talking lab or smaller.
I got the radiation blues on a nuclear time, but they call me me Amazing Colossal Man. They call me Amazing Colossal Man.